Most of us that were alive back then can remember the prolific rise of Street Fighter II. It hit arcades in 1991 and was immediately considered one of the best games ever created. It took a genre that had been around for more than a decade, redefined it, and set it on a completely new course that would make it one of the most popular types of games in the arcade setting. Capcom rode that wave of popularity for a long time and across 5 different upgrades that would introduce new fighters, mechanics, and even change up the art and presentation a bit. It wouldn't be until the summer of 1995 when they finally introduced a fully new Street Fighter to arcade audiences, that title being Street Fighter Alpha, or Street Fighter Zero as it was known in Japan. It premiered on the CPS2 arcade hardware, but Capcom was keen on getting it out to as many people as possible, so it was also produced for Capcom CPS Changer, a Super Gun style setup that played arcade games using a normal television and compatible with Super Nintendo controllers. Saturn and PlayStation versions were released shortly thereafter. In this episode, we will go over how the Saturn version turned out, its effect on me as a gamer, and compare it to what else was available at the time. I hope you guys enjoy my review of the Capcom classic Street Fighter Alpha. Capcom had been tinkering with Street Fighter II's gameplay for years. The speed, the timing, the hitboxes, it all saw some kind of tweak or change between the original and Super Street Fighter II Turbo. With Street Fighter Alpha, Capcom took some pretty big steps to change things up even more. The Super Combo gauge introduced in Super Turbo would get modified here into a 3-part leveling system that allowed you to use it much more often. Level 1 was fairly weak and didn't do much, but Level 3 could dole out some serious damage and leave your opponent ready for the kill. You could also get more hits in by mashing the buttons as the Super Combo was firing off. Capcom also introduced a chain combo system that allowed you to link attacks weak to strong, expanding combo potential for every single fighter. An Alpha counter special move was also created so you could stop pretty much any attack dead in its tracks. Perhaps the biggest change, however, was the new air blocking. You were no longer screwed by jumping into a fireball or uppercut, as you could now block these attacks. Don't get me wrong, it still felt like Street Fighter II in many ways, but it also felt different in many others. Another huge change was the cast of fighters you could choose. Series staples like Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Sagat, M. Bison, and Akuma return, each with a new look and a few new moves. We'd also get some Street Fighter I entries. Both Birdie and Adon make their playable debuts here. Capcom would also expand the Street Fighter universe a bit by also including characters from Final Fight. Guy shows up as well as Sodom. Finally, 3 completely new fighters were created just for this game. Rose is a fortune teller that uses soul energy to power her attacks. Charlie is a friend of Guile's and uses many of the same style of attacks. And finally, Dan is a hidden fighter that directly parodies some of SNK's work. That's a roster of 13 fighters, half of which that had never been playable before. Considering that this was released after Super Turbo, you'd think that it would be a sequel story-wise, but what you see here is actually taking place before the original Street Fighter II. Taking inspiration from the Street Fighter animated film, it connects the story in between the first and second games, even going so far as to recreating the iconic dramatic battle match between Ryu, Ken, and M. Bison. It was the start of a brand new series that would cover 2 sequels and an upgrade, all of which appeared on the Saturn.
Round 1, fight! Hadouken! 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 Hadouken!
The first thing you'll notice about Street Fighter Alpha is the more anime-style look and feel to its visuals. It appears more cartoonish than the games before it, right down to the environments and even the opening cinematic. I actually really enjoyed the changes made here. Some of the fighters see some pretty exaggerated looks. Sagat goes from a tall, skinny dude to an imposing hulk of a figure. Chun-Li is more shapely, Ryu and Ken look younger, and M. Bison is more intimidating. The new fighters look great and the animation of all your normal, special, and super attacks come off impressively. The only area I was a little let down by were some of the simplistic backdrops. While they are all colorful and detailed, some are quite sparse in regards to set pieces and the stuff going on. And there is a pretty large divide here when it comes to the better ones. I love the small town vibe of the Ryu stage, but something like the train yard is just so drab and uninteresting. Some stages are even time shifts of one another, which again lacks personality and excitement. This is actually an area where I feel the series would improve greatly sequel to sequel. What starts out pretty tame here gets a lot better in Alpha 2 and 3. It's far from a bad looking game though, and considering the Saturn didn't need a RAM cartridge to pull it off, I'd say it's a great port of the arcade. In fact, sticking the two side by side, they look very similar. You'll mainly notice little things like the arcade switching between more fighters and backgrounds during the opening. Resolution differences even favor the Saturn in some ways, because it makes the sprites appear slightly larger. You'd really need to slow these two down and count frames to see any real difference, something that was a win for consoles that had never really been able to replicate arcade fighters this closely outside of a Neo Geo. Most animations are so close, you can't tell any real difference. It wasn't as flashy as X-Men Children of the Atom, but it still blew me away.
Hadouken! 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 Street Fighter Alpha.
Contrary to some, I have always loved the music in the Street Fighter universe of games. From the arcade's original goodness to the brash remixes we get on the home systems, there was always something worth listening to. It's no different here. From the opening jingle to the reimagined tunes, this is a soundtrack worth ripping. The Saturn does a great job of sounding just like the arcade original. Every jab, fireball, uppercut, and kick lands with a satisfying thud or smash. The music is read directly from the CD, and here are a few of my favorites. As much as I enjoyed this game, it was not without its flaws. Perhaps its largest sin was the omission of series favorites. If you discount the secret fighters and bosses, you are left with just 10 default characters. This list omits guys like Honda, Balrog, and Vega, and I would have much rather have seen Street Fighter 1 and Final Fight characters like Mike and Hager. As I mentioned before, some of the backgrounds are really not that great either. They are so plain and uninspired, and a big step back from most of the ones seen in Super Turbo. For all its weaknesses though, the one thing it got right was its gameplay. It kept the foundation that previous games had built while adding just enough newness to make it all worth playing again. The gameplay from the arcade transitions flawlessly to the Saturn. The controller's D-pad allows every motion and charge to come off without a hitch, and the 6-button face mapped to each attack just as it should. It really was one of the very first times a home port of a Street Fighter game had been so close. I mean, you can go back to the 3DO port of Super Turbo and be impressed, but you notice things like the lack of parallax scrolling right away. Here, you simply can't tell it apart from the arcade without seeing the two side by side. Seriously, take a look at the unmarked comparison. The Saturn nails the look and sounds of the arcade perfectly. At a time when even the most impressive 16-bit conversions saw numerous concessions, This showed us what we could expect from the Saturn going forward, and that was just fine by me. As you all know, the Alpha series would go on to spawn some incredible sequels on the Saturn. Alpha 2 and its upgrade Alpha 2 Gold set a standard for non-RAM expansion conversions that made owning a Saturn at that time a must for serious arcade fans. Unfortunately, Alpha 3 would be a Japanese Saturn exclusive that was never released anywhere else, forcing you to take part in a PlayStation or Dreamcast port that lacked the same options that were on the Saturn. But it was this game right here that I remember so fondly as one of the first home versions to really make it clear the Saturn had the power to do Capcom's best justice. It set my expectations for everything that followed, and I wanted nothing less than an equally incredible experience. And for the most part, I got it. Capcom's work on the Saturn was almost always top tier, and even when something wasn't quite worth boasting about, it was still playable. If you were a fan of the PlayStation, Alpha was quite solid there as well, and there was even a freaking Game Boy Color version of it if you can believe it. The Alpha series kept the Street Fighter fire burning bright until Part 3 was released in 1997, a game I always wished had been given a chance on the Saturn. I think with an 8MB extended RAM cartridge, it would have been killer. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time. In March of 1996, Capcom released Street Fighter Alpha 2 in arcades across North America. It was a sequel to Street Fighter Alpha, which continued the story for characters we knew and loved, including some from the classic beat-em-up Final Fight. The original had been a very solid game, but suffered from stages that weren't very exciting, a subdued soundtrack, and a small roster of fighters that were missing a number of staples from the Street Fighter universe. With Alpha 2, Capcom wanted to expand everything. More fighters, better graphics, more emotional music, and a new combo system to liven things up. When the inevitable console versions were announced, me and my buddies had to have it on Saturn as soon as it was released in Japan, which came in September of that same year, just 6 months after the arcade edition. While I had been expecting another bang-up conversion from Capcom, what they delivered was nothing short of spectacular. Even without a RAM expansion, Street Fighter Alpha 2 was simply put, one of the best arcade conversions a home console had ever seen. In this episode, we will be taking a look at that, talk a bit about its visuals, sound, gameplay, and extras, and see if it's still the titan it was all those years ago. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Street Fighter Alpha 2 for the Sega Saturn. First available in Japan where it is known as Street Fighter 02, Capcom kept many of the additions that began with the first installment. You still get the 3-tier super combo gauge, air blocking, throw and ground recoveries, and of course alpha counters, for which the fighters now have 2 instead of just 1. Also making a return are the rival battles and the story-related final boss encounters that changes fighter to fighter. Changes include the chain combos from Alpha 1 being replaced by a new system called Custom Combos. It's directly tied to your super combo gauge, and should you hit 2 punch or 2 kick buttons simultaneously, you start what is essentially a custom super combo that allows you to link many of your normal and special attacks into one long offensive string. Should you fell an opponent using the custom combo, you get the burst of light just like with a standard super combo. Also new to this entry are 5 fighters added to the roster of 13 from the first one. You have Sakura, a school-aged girl who is Ryu's biggest fan, Gin, an assassin that fought in the very first Street Fighter tournament, Dalsim, the stretchy Indian yoga master trying to save his village, Rolento, the former Mad Gear member from Final Fight, and finally Zangief, the great Soviet wrestler. There's also some secondary versions of a few of the fighters that offer additional movesets or visual changes. Among them is Shin Akuma, Evil Ryu, Original Chun-Li, and the Champion Edition versions of both Zangief and Dhalsim. The Saturn version also featured an extra illustration mode that has a bunch of cool art images of the cast and locations from the game. This was not included in the PlayStation edition. Aside from these additions and changes, the gameplay is very similar in timing and flow to the first Street Fighter Alpha. There are some additional balancing tweaks that attempt to make the matchups more fair, and it has a training mode for newcomers. For those of you that enjoy a good challenge to test your skills, there is also a couple of survival mode options to see how long you can last against the bloodthirsty AI.
Round one, fight! Hadouken! 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 Hadouken!
Before the Saturn, arcade ports of two-dimensional fighting games had come with many concessions. You often lost sprite size, animation frames, color, detail, and other visual downgrades that were extremely noticeable. But once again, the Saturn conversion comes through with excellent results. Side by side with the arcade original, you can see the Saturn reproduces the color, sprites, and backgrounds extremely close. Due to some resolution differences, you will notice some things appear wider, particularly the fighters, but outside of that, the Saturn does an outstanding job. You will notice on some of the larger characters that there are some animation cuts in the home version, but you'd have to break it down frame by frame to notice it on most of the characters. This is not compatible with the extended RAM cartridges, so what you see here is 100% the Saturn alone. Honestly, the first Alpha port on the Saturn had been quite good, but Alpha 2 was a visual revelation. It showed that the Saturn could do these games, even the best of them, quite a bit of justice. Very little had to be sacrificed, and what did get cut will not be missed by anyone but the most die-hard frame counters among you. The performance was spot on as well. Slowdown plays no part in your battles, and the multi-layered backgrounds add a great sense of flair and depth to your environments. It's one of the best looking and running two-dimensional fighters from that generation.
Hadouken! 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 Hadouken!
While I enjoyed the music from the first Alpha, the soundtrack here is a big upgrade. There's more of it too, but like most things related to art, opinions will vary. So let's have a listen so you can make your own conclusions. My appreciation for the quality of this game cannot be overstated. From the sound and visuals to the superb gameplay, it's damn near fighting perfection. The roster of fighters is diverse and interesting, and I actually enjoyed the individual stories for each one as well. The battles I had with Shin Akuma were legendary, and getting that win on the highest difficulty was always satisfying. Of course, 2 players add a ton of competitive variety to the replayability. The fan service was great as well. You'll see familiar faces in the backgrounds like Mike Hagger, Morrigan, Felicia, and a ton of others. And speaking of backgrounds, they are a huge part of the appeal here. From Gen's back alley to the windswept fields during a storm, they just ooze personality and charm. That extends to the excellent opening animation as well. A fire-lit Akuma gives way to some great music and character introductions, one of the better in the series. This game is a legit total package and one of the best of its kind. I don't have many, but I do have a few gripes that I'd like to bring up. I was very disappointed that Capcom did not expand on the dramatic battle option present in the first alpha. It would have been great to see Ryu and Ken against Shin Akuma, or any other fighter that could have been AI boosted. Dramatic battle added a very nice co-op element to Street Fighter that I loved and me and my friends really enjoyed from the first one. While I realized that the robust dramatic battle options of 03 were impossible without that 4MB RAM cartridge, I still feel we could have had something here worth adding. I was also not a fan of the custom combo system the game offered. Experimentation can bring about some cool results, but overall they felt kinda cheap and amateurish. I mean, launching into a custom combo took nearly no skill at all, and you could chop off 30 or 40% of a life bar just mashing buttons on the controller. Finally, and this is such a small thing I admit, I really do wish that the master rankings from Alpha 1 were kept. It was cool to have a record of your best play sessions, and it's completely gone here. Outside of those personal issues, you won't find much to complain about. It's beautiful, plays great, and is simply put, one of Capcom's best efforts. Like most high-profile Capcom fighters of the era, there are a number of versions of Street Fighter Alpha 2 you can enjoy. While not quite as complete as the Saturn edition, the PlayStation actually does a commendable job with it. It's missing a bit more animation, evil Ryu, and the illustration mode, but it's not a bad game by any stretch. For the most part, it plays great, the graphics are solid, and many of the sound effects are actually of higher quality than even the arcade version. It's not bad at all. Shockingly, there was a Super Nintendo conversion of Alpha 2 as well. While I certainly give Capcom an A for effort, this release of the game has a ton of issues. It doesn't play particularly well, the sound is way off, it's missing a few of the hidden fighters, and there are even slight loading times. It's fun to visit to see the Super Nintendo doing a game of this caliber, but in reality, it's not something you'll choose with much better options out there. For you super fans that can't get enough, Capcom also did an update to Alpha 2 called Alpha 2 Gold in the West and 02 Dash in Japan. This release first appeared in the Street Fighter collection and has additional EX fighters, a versus option to use Kami, additional special moves for some of the characters, and an Akuma mode where you battle a powered up Shin Akuma. It was later released as a standalone budget title for both the Saturn and PlayStation in Japan. Of course, nowadays you have emulation reissues on everything from the PlayStation 2 to the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Honestly, I prefer the 32-bit home conversions for what they are. While arcade purists lament anything that feels different, I like that each version has their own little idiosyncrasies that make them unique. Change is not always a bad thing. A few years after Alpha 2 was released, the Saturn got the 4MB RAM card supporting Street Fighter 03 in Japan. While it stayed exclusive there, it is often considered the pinnacle of the series thanks to its massive roster of fighters and its deep and very dramatic battle options. While it certainly deserves the praise it receives, I feel Alpha 2 here is a very close product in terms of quality and fun factor. It was such a huge leap over the first one in pretty much every way, and it didn't need a RAM expansion to accomplish it. I also love the fact that you can set the computer AI to play the versus mode. In the options, set player 2 to calm, and bingo, you can play versus against a computer, any fighter you want. Likewise, this worked for the first player as well, so setting both to calm would give you a watch mode where the CPU battled it out amongst itself. There was just so much bang for your buck here no matter the platform it was released on. My friends and I played it for months without a care in the world. It was as close to the arcade at home as we had ever seen, and the Saturn release was the best of the bunch. It's one of the defining experiences that made the 32-bit generation so special, a time when the lines between arcade and console began to blur to the point where differences were almost not worth complaining about. For those of us that had been waiting for that moment, a Saturn had provided the best way to play it, something that is often glossed over by those who weren't there or didn't own the platform at the time. You can talk about sales numbers and gamers wanting 3D polygons until you were blue in the face, but for me, games like Alpha 2 here were every bit as important to my 5th generation experience as a Resident Evil, Metal Gear Solid, or Final Fantasy VII. Two-dimensional games had never looked or played so good, and they have held up over the years a hell of a lot better to boot. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time. The Street Fighter Alpha series was a 5th generation staple for me and my friends. As they came out in the arcade, an incredible amount of excitement came with it, because we knew a console release wasn't far behind it. The quality of these games were exceptional, and they easily account for a huge portion of my playtime that generation. The first Alpha had a limited roster, but I genuinely loved the atmosphere and story. It took place before Street Fighter II and introduced a few new characters. Alpha 2 then came along and improved just about everything from the roster, the visuals, and introduced some new play mechanics. When the third game showed up in the arcade in the summer of 1998, a sad reality took hold. The Sega Saturn retail market was in steep decline and the Dreamcast hype was well underway. The chances we would see a Saturn version of Part 3 was looking pretty slim. That fear was confirmed when in December of 1998, a port landed on the Sony PlayStation, a mere 5 months after the arcade version. To its credit, this PlayStation version was extremely well done. It looked the part, played great, and had enough of the animation to pull off a convincing experience. The next home version was for the Dreamcast, another one that nailed the arcade feel while giving us even better animation for a more faithful conversion. Fortunately, a Saturn port finally made its way out in Japan in August of 1999, courtesy of Mitchell Corporation. They had not long developed Osman in the arcade, a group of former Capcom and Data East employees that were no stranger to high expectation. Their work on Street Fighter 03 is held in high regard among the Saturn faithful, a 4MB RAM expansion game that many call the best console conversion available. In this episode, we will take a look at it and see if any of that is true. The gameplay sees numerous changes, modifications, and additions from the previous games in the series. The major additions are the 3 isms you can now choose. The X-ism is essentially a gameplay style closer to what you felt in Super Street Fighter II Turbo. This selection cannot air block, recover from throws, or use alpha counters. It's weak defensively as you take more damage with each hit, and it's missing air and ground recoveries. In the plus column, your damage output is higher, and though you only have one super combo with a single bar, it typically does much more damage should it land every hit. The Z-ism, which is known as the A-ism in the English versions, is your traditional Alpha Zero experience that closely resembles the previous title. You get the ability to air block, you get the recoveries and counters, and of course most fighters get multiple super combos that come with 3 levels of power. New to 03 here is the ability to pull off those supers by choosing the power based on the button you use. For example, if Ryu has a level 3 super combo ready, you can just use 1 level with Weak Punch, 2 levels with Medium Punch, or all 3 levels with Fierce Punch. This is a much easier method as opposed to the first two games in the series that required you to press multiple buttons to use levels 2 and 3 of the Super Combo gauge. The most challenging to play is the V-ism, which is based on the custom combo system from the previous game. Here you get a single variable combo gauge and no predefined super combos. When you pop your variable gauge when it's at least half full, you build your own series of hyper-fast chain combos. This can take some time to master, and technique is extremely important in maximizing damage. That's basically because your moves do less damage than the other two isms. Fortunately, with the V-ism, you do still have access to many of the staples of the Z-ism. You can still air block, recover, and zero counter. It's important to note that the X-ism, Z-ism, and V-ism are all affected by the character you use. Some isms have moves that can only be done with that ism. This extends to the super combos and even the counters. The necessity of a moves list has never been more important than it is here. The changes can make a fighter feel very different, and you'll want to know every move at your disposal to play your best. Other changes in Part 3 include a new block power gauge that loses strength the more times you block. Should your gauge become depleted, it shatters and you become vulnerable. This limits the endless turtle defense that occurred in previous games. This gauge does change in strength based on the ism you choose. There has also been a complete removal of the manual and auto-blocking options from the previous games. Game modes are many and quite extensive in their options. First up is your traditional arcade mode. Here you will battle a string of fighters and interact with a few to unfold their story. If you defeat the final boss, the game ends with the conclusion of that character's arc. Should you lose, you get a bad ending and are sent to the title screen. The Versus mode is a self-explanatory multiplayer option that allows you to compete with one another and keep track of your records. The Training mode is where you practice your moves, combos, and supers. You can set options with how your opponent responds. A big addition is the World Tour mode. As you travel around the globe, you compete in various match types with different objectives. You earn experience in this mode and can level up your fighter's abilities and even add new moves to a playstyle that wasn't there before. Save this fighter and its upgrades to use it in the other areas of the game. The Team Battle mode is a multiplayer option where up to 3 fighters can be chosen in a matchup that is played until both fighter selections are defeated. Survival mode is a brutal trek through different courses of enemy types, where a single loss sends you packing. You have many options in this mode, such as the number of matches you play, and you can save your best play sessions. My personal favorite mode is Dramatic Battle. Here you get a bevy of options that involve 3 fighters. The traditional Dramatic Battle is a 2-on-1 fight where you and a friend can beat up on the computer. There is also the option of taking an AI partner and smacking the computer down. This mode gives you the choice of working your way through the standard roster or taking on the various bosses. By far the most challenging option is the Reverse Dramatic Battle. In this one, it's 2 computer-controlled fighters against you, a brutal turn of events that can be extremely challenging. You can play this mode with survival rules as well. The Final Battle mode is a straight-to-the-final boss option that gives you an ending after the fight. This is a great way to see a fighter's ending that you do not enjoy playing with. Finally, the roster of Part 3 is absolutely massive. Including all the original arcade fighters, it adds additional characters, complete with a story to explain their inclusion. This brings the tally to more than 30 fighters at your disposal, by far the most of any traditional Street Fighter game at that time. In addition to everyone from the 02 cast, you see Fei Long, T-Hawk, DJ, Balrog, M. Bison, Cody, Karen, Rainbow Mika, Julie, Junie, and Guile. There's someone here for everybody, regardless of your playstyle. Using the the extra memory found in the 4MB RAM expansion cartridge, Street Fighter 03 is one of the most impressive two-dimensional titles you'll find on the platform. Load times are super short, the vast majority of the animation is intact as far as I can see, and the visuals are nothing short of breathtaking. Every stage uses color, atmosphere, and nods to the history of this great series and its characters. Just watching the various fighters begin each match with their trademark taunts, poses, and celebrations are enough to put most games to shame. The detail across every surface, every body part, and every set piece will send you away comparing it to every other 2D fighting game on the Saturn. In case I'm not 100% clear, it is gorgeous and easily remains one of the best representations of this genre when it comes to art design and variety. Many will disagree, but I think this game looks better than any of the Street Fighter 3 variations in overall appeal. It's the type of game I cannot complain about visually because it does little to nothing wrong. It builds on the designs from the previous releases, expands on them, and adds so much more that it's damn near overwhelming. There isn't a single stage in the entire set that I don't enjoy fighting against. There's no fighter that I do not enjoy watching their animation unfold in battle. The visuals are a stunning tapestry of eye candy that evolved over the many years this series had been in production. As far as the non-versus games are concerned, this is peak Street Fighter for me in terms of graphics. While I do miss the character-specific ballads of the previous titles, the sound and music in Part 3 more than gets the job done. Some claim the sound effects are not as clear as they could be, but I never had an issue with them. The music is energetic and feels right at home. Let's have a listen to a few samples so you can decide for yourselves. The gameplay here is extremely fun but far from perfect. As with most fighting games with a large roster, there exists some pretty potent imbalances that make some fighters very effective and others much more difficult to obtain the same level of success. These imbalances are often exacerbated by the ism system, which can take an already low-tier fighter and make them even more difficult to play with, and in many cases, enjoy. But the main point that this is fun to play can't be overstated. The amount of options, the different fighting styles, the mid and end boss stories, it all comes together into something just about anyone who enjoys Street Fighter can find appealing. The World Tour mode is almost the equivalent of a small RPG with its upgrades and customizations. If there is ever a true blue Street Fighter RPG, I imagine much of its core makeup will use something similar. The dramatic battle mode provides near endless replay value. You can play it with a friend and beat up on a hated computer opponent, or you can really challenge yourself to take on two fighters hell-bent on your absolute annihilation. There's just so much here to consume and experience that nearly 30 years later I still find this as appealing as I ever did. From a presentational standpoint, the sound and visuals really couldn't have been any better. The 4MB RAM cart keeps the animation frames high and the loading times low, tying a bow on the package that completes its greatness. I was genuinely impressed with the PlayStation Edition, but the Saturn elevates that content to the next level. Even the Dreamcast version, which itself is incredibly well done, is missing a few things that make the Saturn game the preferred version for me. Chief among them, the incredible reverse dramatic battle mode. You can't go wrong with either of these versions really, but if you want the best conversion of this game, it's the Saturn alone at the top of the console heap.
Nobody's late. Try
There are some fighting game purists that come down hard on conversions for their differences from the source material. These people want the arcade, and any change in feel utterly destroys the experience for them. If you happen to be one of these people, fire up one of the many arcade emulation options out there and have a blast. But for me, there was nothing in the Saturn game I did not easily adjust to and excel at. This, of course, was helped by the Saturn's best-in-class gamepad. Playing the Saturn game with its awesome controller after the Dreamcast or PlayStation versions is like jumping from a cheap entry-level sedan into a well-tuned sports car. It's the way it was meant to be played when considering a gamepad. In case I haven't been crystal clear, this game is S tier from the moment you press the start button. But for all my praise, many Japanese publications met 03 on the Saturn with middling reviews. They were unimpressed with its late arrival and were more than happy with the options that preceded it. As you can imagine, the few Western magazines that bothered to review it lavished it with praise. I still remember the Game Fan review that echoed many of my thoughts here. They said it was the best version, and I still believe that to this very day. There are some other great options should you be wondering. If you want a portable version, the PSP game is also loaded with content, and it too has extras that other versions do not have, like the reverse dramatic battle mode and extra fighters. Unfortunately, the Saturn version has become quite expensive over the years thanks to its rarity and quality. If you want a physical version, which comes both with and without the RAM cartridge, you're gonna pay a bit more than you probably want. There are always alternative options on the Saturn should you be curious. Street Fighter 03 is worth the effort to find them, and then some. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.